Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video and talk about this video and this subject that I personally found very particularly interesting. Now, a lot of the times, I usually tend to talk about videos, usually mainly about professional athletes, or at least overall athletes that usually are very highly ranked overall within that of their professional circuit or their professional boxing board or their professional sport, whatever it may be, because boxing is not the only sport that I end up talking about. Of course, I also end up talking about mixed martial arts, MMA, especially that of the UFC fight program, of course that of the ATP circuit, and that of tennis, sometimes a little bit of NBA basketball and NFL football. But anyways, of course, for those of you that did pay attention to the results of the Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury fight that did end up happening this weekend. Of course, Jake Paul, he did end up losing that fight, I believe, by a split decision, which is pretty much somewhat what I predicted. I can't really remember whether I predicted a exact unanimous decision for Tommy Fury or a split decision. I think I maybe lean more towards split decision because I knew that there was going to be a judge that more than likely was going to try to give it to Jake. And what I will say is this: the fight was somewhat competitive. I don't think it was competitive enough to the point to where Jake probably should have been scored for one of the scorecards, but in my opinion, it was somewhat competitive. And one thing I'll give Jake Paul is this: he did knock him down in the last round, I believe in that of the 8th round. But of course, a lot of people, they're now shitting on Jake Paul, basically saying that he's a loser and that he was a clown and that he's a guy all in all that isn't a real professional boxer and that he should just quit and all this other stuff. And of course, we see this with a lot of great athletes. We see this with a lot of people, really, in general. Now, I don't really think that Jake Paul, in my personal opinion, is really that great of an athlete. I don't think that he's a great boxer. But what I do think that he is that I think he's a person overall that was very goal orientated. I think all in all that he was a person that wanted to try something, tried it out, and actually was somewhat decently successful at it. Is he a Muhammad Ali? Is he a Canelo Alvarez? No, he's never going to be any of those guys. But I have to give Jake Paul a lot of credit because what he was able to do just from being a bare YouTuber just a few years ago to now actually being somewhat successful in the boxing ring, even against former UFC champions like that against Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva. Now, some people may say, well, those guys aren't really boxers, and that's true. But how many YouTubers can we say once again would actually be able to get in the ring and actually would be able to outbox those guys? He completely outboxed Tyron Woodley in that fight when they fought the first time around. The fight, in my opinion, really was not even particularly close. I think I had Tyron Woodley winning one, maybe 2 rounds out of the total 8 rounds in that fight. And then, of course, in the Anderson Silva fight, it was very decently competitive, but Jake Paul very clearly got it out. But of course, Jake Paul, he did recently lose to Tommy Fury. In my opinion, it should have been by unanimous decision. But you can maybe debate that Jake Paul won, a solid 3 rounds in the fight. He for sure won 2. He won round 3 and he won round 8. It's just a debate whether you've seen him winning another round. I did predict Tommy Fury to win this fight, but once again, I don't really begrudge Jake Paul for doing what he did. But the big question is, why do so many people seem to be on Jake Paul's ass? Now, could it be overall because the Paul brothers, they don't really have the greatest of reputations overall within that of YouTube history? It could be that a little bit. But to be honest with you, especially within that other boxing community, it seems to be a little bit more than that. It seems overall to be a little bit of jealousy or a little bit of vitriol for whatever reason. Because I see so many average blokes or so many average Joes talk all this shit on the internet, or even certain friends of mine, and they say, oh, well, Jake Paul, he's just a loser. He couldn't beat a professional boxer. In fact, I was actually having a very good conversation overall with my friend yesterday, and I thought that, he was going in on Jake Paul a little bit too hard. And some of you may be looking at me, why are you really sticking up for Jake Paul? Why are you defending him? Are you saying overall that he's a great boxer? What are you really trying to say? Well, what I'm really trying to say about Jake Paul is that I don't really begrudge somebody who just started trying something a few years ago. Someone that clearly I don't think has had any major pro experience in that of the boxing ring, especially against that of professional fighters or professional boxers. And also someone that I don't believe has ever been a part of the amateur circuit. And I was having a conversation with my friend yesterday, and he says overall, well, we always grill certain athletes like Kirk Cousins or DeMar DeRozan when they fall up short, and at least they're professionals in their sport. Jake Paul really isn't. He hasn't beat a professional boxer, so why are you going easier on him once again, the context is completely different. When you take a look at certain athletes like that of a Kirk Cousins or an Adrian Broner or a DeMar DeRozan, because those are all athletes that, in my opinion, they're somewhat along the same level. They're professionals and they're somewhat decently skilled at their craft, but you know that they're not going to lead you anywhere. Kirk Cousins is never going to lead anyone, usually ever past, the first round of the playoffs. He ended up getting that one good win against an older Drew Brees, or a Drew Brees that just ended up screwing up. Whatever overall your opinion was of that game, maybe a little bit of both. Kirk Cousins is never going to lead you to a Super Bowl. He's never going to. And you know that, and overall you're a little bit harsher on that person because you expect higher expectations of a man that has been bred with football for his whole entire life. And when you talk about DeMar DeRozan or Adrian Broner, these are guys that have been trained in their craft and trained professionally for years upon years upon years upon years, possibly even decades when it comes down to it. So once again, you have to be a little bit harder on those overall who we have higher expectations for. When Canelo Alvarez loses a fight, overall, depending on who it is, you have to be a little bit harder on him. When it comes to Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence, if they were to lose a fight, or Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder or some of those other guys, you have to be a little bit harder on them because they've been training for years upon years upon years upon years. Jake Paul has not done that. So like I said, I'm not going to really go super hard on him because, once again, I don't think that there's really a great reason to. I think that he's just a person that overall, sure, he has his controversies in the past, but he tried to do something. He actually made it somewhat competitive against a professional boxer, and that's a lot more than what a lot of us can say. And I'm not one of these people overall that whenever criticism pops out, I'm not one of these people that always goes on this coping mechanisms and says, oh, well, he's better than you, he's richer than you. Because I always think that that's a retarded excuse that many people pretty much just do to cope with the fact that their athlete is never going to live up to their potential or the potential that they were hoping. But once again, I'm not really going to go too hard on Jake Paul because, once again, he only started this, especially in the professional training, only really about a few years ago. So I'm not really going to go super hard on him because Tommy Fury was a legitimate boxer. As I said, he was going to be heading into this fight. That's why I favored for him to win this fight when it came down to it. And in my opinion, if Jake Paul is going to continue his boxing career, that will be up to him. He can beat certain boxers, but they're going to have to be lower ranked. They can't be someone like a Tommy Fury that's going to be a heavyweight fighter, someone that's going to have, or a cruiserweight, whatever he weighs, someone that has a 6-inch reach advantage over him, and someone all in all that, is decently big and somewhat skilled. Now, I don't think that Tommy Fury is ever going to be a Tyson Fury or a Muhammad Ali. But at the end of the day, he still was decently skilled enough to give Jake Paul his first loss and school him in certain moments of the fight. So I really don't, I don't criticize Jake too much for that. It's almost kind of like, if I were to compare it, I remember when Patrick Mahomes ended up losing the first time to Tom Brady. And a lot of people, because they could see that Patrick Mahomes was the up-and-coming star. Now, I don't think that Jake Paul is really going to be a big, huge star up-and-coming in boxing. I don't think he's going to be a future top 10 pound-for-pound guy overall when it comes down to it. But I do think that there's a little bit too much hatred or a little bit too much vitriol, really for not that much reason overall. But it is what it is. Anyways, Dante is going to talk about it. I thought it was very particularly interesting. Let's get straight into it.
About Jake? What do you think of Jake?
Clown.
Yeah.
He's a clown.
Who you got in the Tyson Fury Jake Paul fight? Or do you even care?
Tommy.
Or Tommy Fury. Tyson would be the same result.
Tyson, I think, because he's...
Can Tommy Fury even fight, though?
It's very interesting. People call Jake Paul a clown now. It could be because he's more criticizing of other fighters, or of course he talks a lot of shit. It could be because of that, but what boxers are out here calling KSI or some of these other YouTubers that are trying to get into boxing? What are some of these guys overall? Are they calling KSI a clown? Are they calling some of these other guys a clown? So it's very clear that a lot of people, they just either A, don't like Jake Paul personally, or there's something more into this.
Oh, like, really? I don't know.
And if I had to guess, it's probably a little bit of both.
And huge, by the way.
He's
jacked.
I don't know. But I know that Jake can't fight.
DontaesBoxingNation, what's going on, guys? So
And Javonta Tank Davis said, I know Jake can't fight. Well, of course, according to Gervonta Tank Davis, he would probably say that because Gervonta Tank Davis is debatably one of the top 10 pound per pound best fighters in the world, at least when you talk about all around skill. Resume, no. But when you talk about his all around skill, then yes, he's up there with a lot of people. Once again, I'll state this, and certain people will take a look at me and say, what are you really saying about Jake Paul? Why are you sticking up for him the way that you are? Or why are you making excuses? Well, I don't think it's really an excuse. You're talking about a guy that once again was formerly a YouTuber. That would basically be your guy that you see in the boxing gym. You know, sure, he may train in the boxing gym or spar here and there, but then all of a sudden he gets professional training only for a few years. Do you know how many guys would not even be as successful as what Jake Paul has been able to do? That's why overall I don't criticize him too harshly. Because a lot of these guys, I see a lot of these guys, even including some of my friends, they talk all this shit and they're like, oh, I could even beat Jake Paul. Dude, no, you couldn't. I'm not saying that there's not a couple of people that maybe you would see in the boxing gym that wouldn't beat Jake Paul. That's not what I'm saying at all. There's great talents all across the world. But there's a lot of people overall that are talking way too much shit for never really accomplishing anything in their life. And that's why, in my opinion, it's just so annoying to really hear all this shit talk really from guys that have never really even accomplished anything. And once again, I'm not one of these guys overall that says, oh, well, you know, he's going to accomplish way more than you or he's richer than you. I'm not one of those guys because I criticize a lot of athletes overall on my channel. I don't ever mean to be rude, but I'm usually a harsh critic myself. But once again, you have to put the proper context between the criticism. Jake Paul is a guy that, once again, this was his first professional fight against a professional boxer when it came down, or his first fight against a professional boxer. And in my opinion, it was a hell of a matchup to pick. Of course, a lot of people stated that, well, Tommy Fury really isn't that good. Well, obviously, he's decent enough because Tommy Fury, once again, he's an undefeated boxer when it comes down to it. And on top of that, he comes from a rich boxing family. You know, it just is what it is. Now, once again, do I believe that he's an A-grade fighter? No, I don't. But as I stated in my fight prediction, he was going to be able to do certain things. I could already tell with his movements and his establishment of the lead hand and a multitude of other things. He was just going to be able to do things that other people were not going to be able to do in the ring with Jake Paul. Period. Just is what it is.
Jake Paul, he definitely left fighters with something to talk about this weekend as he gets in the ring for the very first time with a professional boxer, Tommy Fury, and loses. The fact that Paul was fighting against a real professional boxer is what made this a real professional boxing match. So Gervonta Tank Davis and Clarissa Shields, they had a little bit of a disagreement, but it was somewhat of a friendly disagreement on their take on the fight. Now, I'm not going to read the entire conversation. You guys can read it. It's on the screen, but I will sum it up. Gervonta, he started it off by saying, crazy to people how this boxing-ish work. Y'all cheer for a clown after a loss, but actual boxers, y'all on them if they lose. Sport filled with D-riders. And Clarissa Shields.
And what that tells me is that overall some of these boxers, even, they're also a little bit pissed off that Jake Paul, that he can earn overall more than what they can earn with his events. It just is what it is. So that's what that tells me. More than likely, a lot of people are taking a look at this Jake Paul, and that's why there's so much hatred towards him. Because they take a look at him, and of course, him and his brother does not, they do not have the best of reputations overall on that of YouTube. But a lot of people take a look at him, and they're like, wow, this dude, this bum, this average Joe, this guy like me, when it comes down to it, at least that's their view. They think overall that, Jake Paul is just some average guy. And, according to a lot of people, he probably is. But he's also decently successful in a multitude of avenues. And a lot of people take a look at it and they're like, I could potentially beat this guy in the ring. But yet, this guy co-main events overall, or he main events a card, and he's actually able to earn millions or hundreds of thousands of buys and earn millions upon millions of dollars. This dude is an absolute clown. This dude is, and that's where it comes overall with a lot of the harsh criticisms for Jake Paul, because really, it comes from an area of jealousy. Just my view of it.
So she responds by saying yes, like she kind of agreed with Gervonta, but her main rebuttal was she's never made fun of a fighter losing. She never kicks a fighter while he's down. She talked about how Jake Paul made fun of her when she lost in her MMA fight. But she's not going to diss him back because he's not a real fighter, basically, is what she was saying. Listen, man, at the end of the day, we all know what time it is.
Now, listen to some of the points that Dante is about to bring up. Because I don't necessarily disagree with the first point that he's about to bring up. But the second point that he's about to bring up, I'm not going to say that there's absolutely no truth in it, but in my opinion, it's mainly ludicrous. Let's hear overall what he has to say.
We all know the only time there's a big celebration when a boxer loses, especially when it comes to an American boxer, is when it's a black boxer. Of course they're going to defend Jake Paul's loss.
Well, what I'll say is this, Dante. I agree with you overall from the main other demographics that overall, a lot of the times there is an extra celebration when especially a dominant or a great black boxer does end up losing in the sport. But let's also be real, Dante. You're shooting off the fireworks whenever overall someone like a Vasily Lomachenko or a Canelo or a Tyson Fury or an Alexander Usyk or an Aoya in a way potentially loses. Because you know that means overall that you can be potentially proven right with a lot of the points that you're making, which is that a lot of these guys that they're overrated on the pound for pound list. So let's also be real.
The same people that are defending Jake Paul's loss were the same fans that were celebrating
And
Deontay.
that's a big part of the reason actually why you and your boy Aki, why you predicted overall Tommy Fury to lose this fight, because you hate the Fury family with a burning passion.
Wilder losing to Tyson Fury, and so on and so forth. Just like those are going to be the same fans that are going to celebrate if Davis were to lose to Ryan Garcia. They've already got their excuses lined up for if Lomachenko loses to Devin Haney. But if Devin Haney loses to Lomachenko, they are going to completely trash Devin Haney. According
I would agree with that, Dante, but I also think that you're very similar. Listen, what I also state is this, because when I was having my conversation with my friend yesterday, he was like, oh, well, Jake Paul, him losing, it's just nothing but excuses. You know, it's just nothing but excuses overall. It reminds me when Manny Pacquiao lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., and he had nothing but excuses. Right, but you can't really compare it like that. And I'm not one overall to give excuses overall to just anybody. I think overall that a lot of the times on my channel that I'm usually not really giving into excuses, but there is sometimes such a thing as a valid excuse. Certain people overall, depending on the context, they don't like to give excuses overall with certain fighters or certain athletes that they don't like, but then when it comes to their favorite athletes or athletes that they may like, all of a sudden every excuse in the world is valid and valuable. So you got to really watch out for that. Listen, once again, I'll state it like this, because my friend that I was talking to yesterday, he stated, oh, well, it just reminds me when Manny Pacquiao, when he ended up losing to Mayweather. Well, Manny Pacquiao, his excuse is not valid, not only because he could not prove his shoulder injury, but Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr., even if someone were to say that Manny Pacquiao, he was shorter and blah, 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 and this, either way, that was supposed to be the fight for the number one pound for pound spot. And a lot of people claim that Pacquiao could beat Floyd. A lot of people claim that Floyd could beat Pacquiao. So that was allegedly supposed to be a 50-50 fight. So there is no valid excuses in that fight unless there is a serious injury or something ends up happening, or a serious robbery or something like that, which none of those things really happened. But when it comes to Jake Paul, once again, no one is taking a look at Jake Paul and saying, wow, he's Manny Pacquiao, he's Floyd Mayweather Jr. So once again, people in my view, I think they're being a little bit too hard on him. But the big question is, why are they being a little bit too hard on him? Now, once again, the Paul brothers are not known for having the best of reputations when it comes down to it overall on the past of YouTube. That is understandable. And sometimes Jake Paul, he comes across as a little bit abrasive. But what do I also think that it's a part of? I think it's a part of a lot of people looking at Jake Paul and saying, who the fuck is this guy? This guy is just an average guy. This guy is just an average Joe Blow. The only reason why he's able to get these events is because he was so popular on YouTube. I could do what he could do if I had a decent YouTube name. And who knows, possibly. Do I believe that just any average Joe Blow could do what Jake Paul could do? Do I believe that a lot of the people that I see talking shit, that they could actually beat Jake Paul? No. No, personally, I don't. But it is what it is. That, once again, that's not me saying that he's a pro. That's not me saying he's a professional. But what Jake Paul has been able to do within a short amount of time, he's been able to do a hell of a lot more, I guarantee you, than what 99% of the other people or average people that I see talking shit overall on this fight could ever do.
In the old media, it's only a big win if the right fighter wins. Jake Paul was a celebrity boxer that old media, deep down, they dreamed that he could make the transition over to boxing and really become a superstar in the sport. Deep down, a lot of them were hoping that he could be the new face of boxing someday. And all those dreams were
Well, Dante, what I'll say is this. Jake Paul somewhat, at least when you want to talk about money, he somewhat is a little bit of a face, at least in terms of, entertaining events. Is he a face of a top 10 pound for pound list? No, he's not the face of the top 10 pound for pound list or anything like that when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, I think that your assertion that a lot of people, especially old media, actually wanted Jake Paul to make the transition into actually becoming overall the face of boxing. Or, I mean, if you're alleging what I think you might be alleging, which is that he would eventually, potentially become one of the top boxers, I don't think that anyone was really expecting that. Even Jake Paul's biggest fans. Was anyone really expecting Jake Paul to beat Canelo Alvarez or to beat Tyson Fury? Was anyone ever expecting Jake Paul to beat Alexander Usyk? We all know that Jake Paul, that he was trying to beat a couple of decent ranked boxers so he could try to get Canelo Alvarez in the ring. That pretty much overall was the hope of it. I don't think that anyone was ever taking actually a look at Jake Paul and saying, oh man, this dude is actually going to surpass Terrence Bud Crawford and some of the other black fighters that we don't want on the list. I don't think anyone was actually taking a look at it that way. That's not me saying, all in all, when it comes down to it, that there's not some people that had a little bit of white pride overall when he beat Tyron Woodley or Anderson Silva, or that maybe there's not a little bit of that. But was anyone really expecting Jake Paul to really make the top 10 pound for pound list one day?
and really become a superstar in the sport. Deep down, a lot of them were hoping that he could be the new face of boxing someday. And all those dreams were completely crushed this past weekend when he lost to Tommy Fury. That's all I got.
I think that's I think that's a bit of a wild assertion, Dante, but you're known for those. Once again, I don't think Jake Paul, I don't think anyone truly expected him overall to actually, become the face of boxing, but at least in terms of, being actually highly ranked and also being decently popular, but it is what it is.
But now, guys, I'm on to the next one. All right, now.
But anyways, that's really about it for today. But I wonder if Dante would talk the same way about someone like a KSI. Very interesting. We all know that he wouldn't. But anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Very interesting. A lot of the vitriol overall that I see overall for Jake Paul now that he lost. Very interesting. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Thought it was an interesting topic. But that's really about it for today. We'll see overall what Jake Paul does next. I was once again having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and he said in his opinion that Jake Paul is never going to beat a professional boxer. I actually don't necessarily agree with that. I just think that it depends on how low or high ranked they are. I think that if he faces a boxer that might be 20-10, or if he faces a boxer that, is about 11-8 or something like that, he might be able to win a few of those fights. Because sometimes there's these boxers that appear on some of these cards to where they have some of these bad records, and you can see why they have their bad records, because their footwork is horrible. The way they throw punches, they throw them over like a Girl Scout when it comes down to it. So I have no doubt in my mind that Jake Paul actually can beat certain professional boxers, but he has to be matched up carefully. In my opinion, this was a matchup that it was somewhat decently close, because Tommy Fury, we didn't really know how good he was, but I knew overall that more than likely Tommy Fury was going to pull out of the fight because he's actually somewhat a professional boxer. Jake Paul, he's somewhat made the transition into it, but I can't really say that he's, the full trainee. It just is what it is. He's going to have to build himself back up against boxers that are a little bit lower ranked. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's really about it. I just thought that was very particularly interesting, but that's really about it. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.